Seneca did not believe the future was something you could plan your way into safely. He believed it was the single greatest illusion the human mind uses to avoid living, and he gave 4 precise reasons why. Most of us treat tomorrow as a vault where our real life is stored, the peace we will feel, the work we will begin, the person we intend to become. We are, in Seneca's view, always preparing and never arriving. In this video we will examine the 4 lies we tell ourselves about the future, drawn from Seneca's letters and his essay on the shortness of life. If the Stoics' approach resonates with you, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Writing around 65 AD, with exile, illness, and a death sentence behind and ahead of him, Seneca observed that men are tight in guarding their fortunes, yet careless about their time, the one thing for which it is right to be greedy. That single observation organizes everything that follows. The first lie is the most seductive, because it disguises itself as ambition. We tell ourselves that the future is the place where life genuinely happens, that the present is merely the corridor we pass through on the way to something better. Seneca saw this clearly when he wrote in On the Shortness of Life that the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. What this reveals is a structural error in how we experience time, because we treat the present as preparation and the future as arrival, when in fact the present is the only portion of time we will ever actually inhabit. The mind that lives in tomorrow never lives at all, it merely defers existence indefinitely, always confident that the real beginning is just ahead. Seneca puts the indictment plainly: while we are postponing, life speeds by. Therefore the man who is always waiting to start has, without noticing, already finished, because the years did not pause while he prepared. And yet this only describes the symptom. But this raises a harder question: why do we trust the future so completely, when nothing about it has been promised to us? We assume the future belongs to us. This is the second lie, and Seneca attacks it not by predicting catastrophe but by exposing a simple accounting error. In his second letter to Lucilius he writes that we should so order our minds as if we had come to the very end, because the great fault is that we always defer, postponing the act of living to a date that recedes the moment we approach it. What this means is that the future is not an extension of our property but a loan whose terms we never read, since no one has guaranteed that tomorrow will be granted at all. Seneca's argument is therefore not pessimistic but precise. He is not telling us that we will die soon, but that we do not know when, which makes the assumption of guaranteed time a kind of self-deception. Because of this, every plan that depends entirely on a future we have not secured rests on borrowed ground. He observes that men do not realize how much they have lost until the loss is irrecoverable, for time slips away silently and leaves no receipt. This is why the Stoic does not despise planning, but refuses to mistake planning for living. However, even this leaves something unexplained. What Seneca says next confronts the strange fact that our minds spend most of their energy not on the future we hope for, but on the future we dread. The third lie is quieter and more personal, because it concerns not events but identity. We tell ourselves that the future will contain a better, calmer, more disciplined version of who we are, that the person who finally begins the work, ends the bad habit, or finds peace is waiting somewhere ahead. Seneca confronted this in his letters when he insisted that wisdom is not deferred but practiced, writing that we should not delay, because life is wasted in delay and the whole of it belongs to the procrastinators tomorrow. What this exposes is the comforting fiction that change is something time delivers rather than something the present demands, since we imagine the future self as a gift the calendar will eventually hand over. Seneca's correction is severe and liberating at once: the only self you will ever have to work with is the one acting now, because the future self is a projection with no power to act and no obligation to arrive. Therefore the resolution made for tomorrow is, in the Stoic view, a way of avoiding the discomfort of beginning today while preserving the flattering belief that we intend to change. He warned that no one is so ignorant as not to know that he must die someday, yet we behave as immortals when arranging our improvement. And yet there is a still deeper distortion. What Seneca examines next is not the future we postpone, but the future we cannot stop imagining, the one that arrives uninvited at 3 in the morning. The fourth lie is the cruelest, because it disguises suffering as foresight. We tell ourselves that anxiety about the future is a form of preparation, that by rehearsing every disaster we somehow defend against it. Seneca dismantled this entirely in his 13th letter to Lucilius, where he wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, and that there are more things likely to frighten us than to crush us. What this reveals is that the anxious mind does not predict the future, it manufactures a counterfeit one and then experiences it as though it were real, so that the dread arrives long before the event and frequently in place of it. Seneca's insight is psychologically exact. The imagined catastrophe is almost always more severe than the actual one, which means the person who lives in fear pays the full price of the disaster whether or not it ever occurs. Therefore he asks the decisive question, why rush to meet your troubles, why borrow tomorrow's grief and add it to today's? Because the future events we fear are uncertain, but the suffering we generate by fearing them is entirely certain and entirely self-inflicted. This is why Seneca counsels that we recall the past, attend to the present, and guard against the future only with reason, not with panic. But identifying 4 lies is not yet a cure. What the Stoics did instead requires turning from diagnosis to discipline. Seneca did not tell us to stop thinking about the future, he told us to think about it correctly. The Stoic practice known as premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, looks at first like the very anxiety we have just condemned, and yet it is its precise opposite. In his 91st letter, describing the burning of the colony of Lugdunum, Seneca argues that nothing ought to be unexpected to us, that we should anticipate all possibilities and rehearse loss in advance so that no event arrives as a stranger. What distinguishes this from anxiety is its purpose, because the anxious mind imagines disaster in order to suffer it, while the Stoic imagines it in order to disarm it. This is why the practice ends not in dread but in equanimity, by examining poverty, exile, illness, and death calmly and deliberately, one strips them of their power to ambush the soul. Seneca writes that the man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive, because they meet a mind already prepared rather than one taken by surprise. Therefore the cure for false futures is not to ignore the future but to rehearse its hardest possibilities in daylight, by reason, until they no longer hold terror. However, rehearsing adversity is only half the discipline. What Seneca pairs it with is a far more difficult instruction concerning the present. If the future is uncertain and the past is gone, Seneca concluded that only the present is fully ours, and that this single portion of time is the one we most consistently surrender. He observes on the shortness of life that men squander the present in expectation of the future, dividing their lives so that they never possess any moment completely. What this means is that the antidote to the 4 lies is not better forecasting but fuller attention, because the person who inhabits the present cannot be robbed by a future that has not come or a past that no longer exists. Seneca's striking claim is that life is long enough if it is well employed, and that we are not given a short life but make it short by squandering it. Therefore the task is not to acquire more time but to stop leaking the time we already hold, since the present, however ordinary, is the only place where living actually occurs. He insists that each day should be received as though it completed the whole of life, so that we are neither owed by the future nor haunted by the past. And yet attention alone can drift into mere passivity. What Seneca demands next is that the present be not only inhabited but examined. Seneca did not leave the recovery of time to good intentions, he gave it a method. Borrowing from the Pythagorean tradition, he describes in his essay on anger a nightly practice in which he reviews the entire day before sleep, asking of himself what bad habit he has cured, what fault he has resisted, in what respect he has become better. What this accomplishes is the conversion of vague resolution into concrete accountability, because the man who audits each day cannot deceive himself with the comforting fiction that improvement is somewhere ahead in time. Seneca writes that when the light has been removed and his wife has fallen silent, he examines his whole day and retraces his deeds and words, hiding nothing from himself and excusing nothing. This is why the practice is so quietly radical, it relocates the future self, the better, calmer person we imagine we will become, into the present, where it can actually be built one evening at a time. Therefore the third lie collapses under the weight of nightly evidence, since the self is no longer a projection awaiting arrival but a record being written now. He notes that the soul, summoned daily to give account of itself, grows steadier and freer from fear. However, a practice sustained alone can still falter. What Seneca recommends to fortify it is something he himself relied upon to the end. The deepest of Seneca's correctives is also the simplest to state and the hardest to enact: live each day as if it were complete in itself. In his letters he advises Lucilius to set in order each day as if it rounded off the whole of life, neither anticipating the morrow with anxiety nor despising it, but receiving it as a gift that need not be repaid. What this dismantles is the entire architecture of postponement, because a day lived as a complete life cannot be a mere rehearsal for some future that justifies it. Seneca writes that the man who has lived rightly each day has lived long enough, since the measure of a life is not its duration but its fullness, and that one who finishes a single day well has, in a sense, finished everything. Therefore the four lies share a single root, the belief that life is something stored in the future, and the cure shares a single principle, that life is something exercised in the present. This is why he could write, facing his own death sentence under Nero, that he was prepared, not because the future held no terror, but because he had already taken possession of every day as it came. And this leads to the most practical implication of everything we have examined. The most applicable consequence of Seneca's argument is uncomfortable, because it removes our favorite excuse. If the future is not the promised land, not guaranteed, not the home of a better self, and not improved by anxious rehearsal, then there is no legitimate reason to defer the life you intend to live. What this means in practice is that the question Seneca presses upon us is not what will you do someday, but what are you postponing right now under the comforting label of later. He writes that while we wait to live, life passes, and that the whole future lies in uncertainty, therefore the only honest response is to begin in the single moment we actually hold. Because of this, the Stoic discipline is not a withdrawal from planning but a refusal to mistake planning for living, since one may prepare wisely for tomorrow while living fully today. Seneca's counsel is to lay hold of the present hour, for the man who depends least upon tomorrow meets it most gladly. Therefore the cure for the four lies is not a feeling but an act, to examine the day, to rehearse adversity by reason rather than dread, and to inhabit the present so completely that no future can hold your life hostage. What remains is to see how these threads form a single, coherent answer. Seneca's four lies about the future, that it is where life happens, that it is owed to us, that it holds a better self, and that fearing it prepares us, collapse into one error, the belief that life is stored somewhere ahead rather than lived here, now, in the only time we possess. His remedy is equally unified, joining the calm rehearsal of adversity with the daily examination of conduct and the full inhabitation of the present, so that no imagined tomorrow can rob the day we actually hold. The practical implication is direct: the life you keep deferring to the future is the one quietly ending in the present, and only by acting now do you reclaim it. The Stoics wrote for themselves, but what they left behind survived 2,000 years for a reason. Subscribe and we will keep exploring why. And if you want to start your own Stoic practice, there is a free Stoic starter kit in the description, quotes, a daily routine, and a journal to get you started.